This is my first Reddit post, as well as my first Reddit account to begin with. I've never used this platform before, but I've wanted to write my experience somewhere and somehow, and this is the best place for me to do so. Maybe someone has had a similar experience. To start, I am not an eloquent story writer or best at elaboration, but all I want to say is that this is all true. I have been dealing with something that has lived in my closet for as long as I can remember. I'm a 20-year-old female, but my first real memory of this thing was when I was 3 years old. For some extra detail, my mum graduated high school with 2 kids under her belt. She had my brother at 17 as a junior, and me when she was 18 and a senior. My dad was 1 year her senior and was in college by the time I was born, but he dropped out of school and our lives just as quickly. He's bounced in and out of our lives and left my mum to raise us on her own with the help of her mother. We lived with my grandma when I was between 1 and 2, before my mum decided to jump from apartment to rent to buy houses, with my dad occasionally trailing in behind her, before breaking off again. She worked 2 jobs and was going to cosmetology school, and with a child to support and the help of my grandma, she was able to buy a small house from a nice elderly couple by the time I was 3. I distinctly remember the house when she had gone to view it. I clung to her leg the entire walk through. I remember it being cold even though the fireplace was lit and being terrified of the basement. She tried to get me to go down with her, but I had started crying, so the elderly woman had stayed upstairs with me while my mum looked around downstairs with the elderly man. When we moved in, it felt warmer. With all of our familiar furniture, it wasn't as daunting, and I remember trying to help my mum paint my room, even though I could barely hold up a roller. The one thing that still stayed cold and scary was the basement. My brother and I were petrified of it and would play a game of chicken to see who could make it further down the flight of stairs. Of course, to any child, basements are scary, but there was something about this one that really bothered us. My mum tried her best to make it as homey down there as possible, and had made it into a second living room and play area for us. It definitely worked, but my brother and I wouldn't stay down there alone. By the time I was 5, it wasn't as scary, and one day the cold atmosphere of the basement completely dissipated. It was harder for our mum to get us to leave the basement than it had been to get us to go down there in the first place. It was also when I was 5 that I have my first memory of the thing in my closet. Just like the basement, it happened overnight. My closet suddenly became the scariest place in the house for me. I used to slip into my closet after a nightmare and sleep in there, so when I had opened up my closet to do that one night, I remember how terrified I was. The closet, when open, would usually be lit up by my nightlight, but this time it was completely black. I couldn't see my shoe rack or my toy bins inside. It was just a black mass. I couldn't look away or move. I was completely paralyzed and stood still in front of the doors. There was a soft chirping sound like the baby rabbits I'd watch run between our yard and the neighbours. I wanted to go in to find the rabbit, and thought that it had to be as scared as I was, but after a few seconds I ended up shutting the closet doors to hide under my covers until morning. From there I couldn't sleep unless I had our Jack Russell sugar with me, and the closet doors were closed. For most nights nothing would happen, and I felt safe with my nightly routine of closing the closet doors and sleeping with sugar under the covers. A few months had passed before the noises started up again. I woke up to see Sugar standing at the foot of my bed with the fur along her spine bristling and growling at my open closet doors. Like the first night that I had seen it, the closet was completely black. The chirps started, and with each chirp it'd get a snappy bark from Sugar. I remember instead of being scared, I had gotten angry and started yelling at my closet, telling it that if it didn't stop, I'd have Sugar tear it apart. The chirping stopped. Sugar laid back down and I went back to sleep. This continued for months. The sounds would come up in the middle of the night, but it would change periodically. The rabbit chirps to hog noises to an amalgamation of sounds I didn't understand half the time. The rabbit and hog noises are the most memorable, and every time I'd threaten it with the declaration of Sugar attacking it, the noises would quieten down. My mum and brother never believed me. My brother thought I was being a scared little girl, and my mum thought it was my vivid imagination. Every time they'd tell me that nothing was there, and I'd get frustrated, and by default would get more and more agitated at night with the thing in my closet. When I was 6, my mum started seeing a guy who I'll call R. He was an awful man. and despite having 2 kids of his own, was terrible with children. He'd scream at us and beat us whenever we were out of place. R's nightly visits to me became more terrifying than the nightly visits from the Thing. The first time I had physically seen the Thing was when R had come home drunk. It hadn't been too late in the night, but we had all been asleep by the time he rolled in. I still remember his footsteps down the hallway. Too quiet for a drunk man, and I knew he would be coming to my room for another one of his visits. I jumped out of my bed, opened the closet doors, and slipped right in. It was cold, and the feeling of not being alone is something I can't shake today. I heard R open my bedroom door and walk in. Sugar ran from the room after a quick smack, and all I could hear was R's heavy breathing as he pulled the covers off of my bed. After a few seconds, my bedroom light was turned on and the closet was lit up from the gap under the doors. I looked sideways, and when I did, I saw long black hands planted on the floor beside mine. A lanky black figure was sat beside me, hunched over and staring through the gap between the 2 closet doors. It's hard to describe how it looked. It wasn't quite humanoid, but it definitely wasn't a great black beast that I had imagined it to be. It was gangly and creepy looking, with big white hollowed eyes. I could see no nose or mouth from its shadowed body, just tall with long arms and legs, tucked down beside me. It never looked at me. Its head followed every movement of R until he eventually turned the lights off and left my room. I was frozen in place and felt like crying but couldn't. When I couldn't hear R's footsteps any more, the closet doors opened and I felt my legs walking me to bed and was suddenly asleep. After that I didn't see it for years. My mum broke it off with R and it was the 3 of us again. I still kept my closet doors shut at night, but I didn't need a nightlight or my dog to protect me anymore. I still felt eyes on me now and again, and while walking down the hallway, or while I did laundry in the basement, but for the most part no noises and no sightings from the Thing. When I turned 12, my mum and dad took me and my brother to Disneyland as a birthday gift. My body wasn't used to the more or less bad air quality of California, and by the time we were back in Washington, I was in unbearable pain. By the time my mum brought me to the hospital, my appendix had burst and I was taken in for emergency surgery. For a week I was in and out of consciousness, but for the most part I was doing well. I was home in bed, resting, and honestly all I recall is being glad that I got to stay out of school longer. It was 2 weeks in that I saw the Thing again. I woke up in a cold sweat and saw that my closet doors were open. I stared into the closet for a few minutes before I turned my head to the other side of my bed and saw the tall shadow Thing standing beside me. Painkillers in my system and being drowsy from just waking up prevented that, but I had been startled by its sudden appearance. I couldn't move, so I just stared back at it. I'm not sure how much time passed, but it had been long enough for me to get tired again, and I was starting to fall in and out of sleep. I felt a hand press down on my forehead and start smoothing down my hair. The hand was cold and it felt good against my feverish skin. After a few seconds of petting, I was out for the rest of the night and the majority of the following day. After I'd gotten better and returned to school, I saw it more often again. It didn't make the strange noises anymore, but I'd often wake up to see it staring at me from any area of my room that it felt like standing in that night. Usually it was on either side of my bed, or sitting in the corner, or huddled in the open closet. It didn't ever do more than stare at me, and even though its appearance still scared the living daylights out of me, I wasn't against it being there. Usually once my heart calmed down from waking up and seeing it stare at me, I'd fall back asleep and it'd be gone by the morning. Years passed and its hobby of staring at me stopped, and eventually I didn't see it anymore. I figured that it had been a childhood imagination and that it was my mind's way of dealing with my trauma. When I graduated high school, I moved to my first apartment with my brother. I was 18 and excited to have a place of our own. My brother was a year into college already and I was preparing to start my first year. The first night that we slept in our apartment was the night that I saw the Thing again. My bedroom had a walk-in closet and was to the direct left of my bed, always in sight. I had just started to fall asleep when the closet door had opened. It terrified me and my first thought was that someone had broken in at some point in the day. and when the shadow thing came ducking out of the closet instead, I was paralyzed. I couldn't look away and watched it come and kneel by my bedside. It stared at me before it put its head on the bed and closed its eyes. Next thing I know, it's morning and it's no longer there. My closet door is shut and I can move again. For the next week I had been extremely on edge and slept in the living room. I didn't know how to react to seeing it again. I thought it had been something made up from when I was a kid, and seeing it again deeply bothered me. Though I eventually returned to sleeping in my room, and again I woke up to the closet opening and it coming to kneel by my bed. It varied in what it did. Most of the time it'd stare, but sometimes lay its head on my bed beside my head and close its eyes or pet my hair. Sometimes it would walk around my room and look at the stuff on my dresser. My cat never reacted negatively to it. He'd sleep by the head of my bed too, and whenever the closet door would open, he'd just move down to the foot of my bed and watch the thing move around my room. Even when my brother and I changed rooms for unrelated reasons, it would still come out of my closet to do whatever it felt like doing that night. It didn't come every night, but most nights I'd wake up to it there. After a year and a half living at that apartment, we moved to a smaller one a few roads down. It followed me there too, and I would wake up to it opening my closet now and again to move around my room. By this time we had gotten our first dog, a puppy, when we first moved into the new place. Just like my cat, he had little reaction to the thing, other than barking a few times when it would first exit my closet and following it around. The thing never had explicit interest in either of my animals, but liked to watch the fish in my fish tank most nights. Now presently my brother and I live in a renovated home, and we've only been here for less than a month now. I have a small room and the thing still comes out of my closet some nights, but now it likes to leave my room to go about the rest of our home. My room is too small with too few items for it to really be interested in anything. My dog doesn't follow it around like he did as a puppy. He knows that the thing isn't going to play with him. My cat still likes to watch it, but usually gets bored and goes back to sleep too. Sometimes I like to follow it out into the living room and watch what it does, and some nights I go right back to sleep again. It doesn't scare me anymore. It's never done anything negative or tried to scare me. I don't come home to open cabinets or trash furniture. It's more of a looker than a doer. Other than a cup that's moved from the coffee table to the counter, it doesn't mess around with much. I've tried talking about it to friends and my brother, but they've never seen it. My brother doesn't care if it's real or not, just so long as it stays out of his room. The same with my friends. As long as they don't have to see it, then they are more than happy to hang out at my place at night. I'm not really searching for much on here, other than simply wanting to share my experience. I know this post is probably hard to read, and like I said, I'm not exactly the best at writing. I guess the most I'm looking for is if someone else has had the same experience. If anyone else has had something following them since they were a kid, or if they've got any idea on what this thing could be or why it likes hanging around so much. Anyways, if you're reading this, thanks for sticking around to the finish. This is mainly a summary of ghostly encounters that the females of my family have been through over the years. These encounters have been going on for decades and normally come in the form of full-body spirits. The women on both sides of my family have always been spiritual and are like magnets to the supernatural. My mum, my dad's mother, had an older brother that had passed away too early in life. My great-uncle Robert had only been in his 40s when he died, and I never learned the reason. But it was a couple of years later that whilst she sat in her room sewing, my mum heard someone's footsteps in the hallway. Now that wasn't a big deal, as back then my dad was a young teen and constantly had friends over. My mum had an open door policy, so neighbourhood kids would randomly be in her house. The footsteps came to a stop in front of her door. She glanced up and then looked back to her sewing after absent-mindedly saying, "Hey Bobby." The steps went on and faded away. It took her a few minutes before her head snapped up and she ran to her door. She looked up and down the hall, but there was no one there. No one else was even in the house. She often tells me how, for the longest time, she thought she had been crazy because her brother had looked so real, as if he had just stopped by after work to say hi. While it made her sad being reminded that he was gone, she was also happy to know that her brother still stopped by to see her. My grandma Ginny, my mum's mother, has just recently lost her second husband John due to a heart attack as he slept. She was unfortunate to find him in the morning, not long after he had passed. It almost traumatized her and broke her heart. Not even a month after his death, she was sweeping the living room, when behind her she heard her name, Ginny, being said, clear as day. She turned around and there was John, standing by the hallway. He didn't say anything more before he vanished. My grandma screamed and fainted, and she didn't see him again until she moved out from the house. She'd often feel someone watching her. My mum has always been a magnet for spirits. She claims it was due to a lot of death being around her as a child and teenager. A lot of her older family members had passed away when she was young, and as a teen, 5 of her friends met with untimely, often tragic deaths. Personally, I think she's just one of those people that are more in tune with spirits, but she often has experiences when she goes to places with history of paranormal occurrences. She's been pushed, had her hair pulled up, and has had her things removed. But the biggest event happened about 6 years after we lost her dad, my grandpa. She had been sleeping but was woken up by something nudging her shoulder. When she opened her eyes, she swears she saw her dad, but when she blinked, he'd gone. They had a close relationship, and while some people would claim she just imagined it because she missed him, I think otherwise. Now myself. While I have not seen a spirit, I have had weird things happen around me. More so, I believe, I can sense that someone is there, but I can't see them. One instance was just a year after we'd lost my grandpa, my mum's dad and my grandma Ginny's first husband, and I was visiting Sandy, my grandpa's second wife. I went to the kitchen for a drink. It was a rough time in my family due to the financial burdens and some health scares from my mum, and I was so sad and depressed. I was only 15 and I felt a sob working its way up my throat. But as I took a deep breath through my nose to try and calm down, I smelled something. Something that had been absent from the house for months. It was black coffee and pipe tobacco. It was what my grandpa had constantly smelled like. My grandma drank a different kind of coffee, but never straight black, and she didn't smoke. My grandpa only drank straight black coffee and smoked an old-fashioned pipe with a special blend of tobacco. I looked around and saw nothing, but I could feel that he was there. And just the thought made me feel a little better. The following incident really freaked me out at the time, and if anyone has any solid idea of what this was, or if they have had a similar experience, I would love to hear it. This happened to me a while back. I decided to go on a camping trip on my own, as I always like camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and my rifle for protection, and jumped in my truck. I got to my chosen trail early in the morning, and I hiked about 15 to 20 miles into it until I found the right spot, and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumbled upon this nice-sized clearing and decided that it was a nice, beautiful spot to settle down in. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and managed to get a fire going. I'm cooking up some food when I start hearing a sound in the distance, underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, most likely a deer that had a lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and it was getting dark, so I couldn't really go find it and put it out of his misery. I think nothing more of it and go about eating my food. After I had finished eating, I doused the fire and crawl into my tent and get into my sleeping bag. I decided that even in my exhausted and relaxed state, I couldn't go to sleep, so I pulled out a book that I had brought with me and started to read by the light of my lamp. Hours went by and I heard that sound again. This time it was closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listened to what seemed to be this animal drag itself across the clearing and towards my tent. It's now really loud, and it sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to about what I assume is the middle of the clearing and suddenly stops. I hear nothing, not even breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. There's nothing but trees and darkness. What the fuck? Completely unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for any other noises. But there's nothing. Just the crickets and the breeze. I decided that there are always a lot of strange noises in the woods and tried not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my rifle. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to my left. I'm up now, wondering if what I am hearing is really what I am hearing, or just a product of being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple of other directions, all different, i.e. old men, old women, even children, and confirm that it's completely real. The noises are closing in and I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot off into the air in case they come too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through the woods. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the nightlife was dead quiet. Not even the wind was making any noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line and saw nothing. I listened intensely to my surroundings. Now there was no laughing, and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit and figuring the gunshot had scared whoever off, I sat down totally exhausted and I fell asleep. I woke up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I then immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Now alert, I grabbed my rifle and listened to what they were saying. I couldn't make out much, but I heard something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent, so I shout again, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly a huge burst of flame like a flamethrower erupted from the middle of the clearing, illuminating several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my rifle, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up and sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was. I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulder the entire way. I didn't hear anyone follow me, and I didn't see anyone or anything the whole way, but I couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched the whole time. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I'd left all my gear in the woods that night. I've only ever told a few people this story in full, and now I finally have an outlet to say something without judgment. I thought this thread would be the best place to post my story. I cover two small things in the house that happened, and one thing that to this day gives me the chills. If anyone has any info, it would be much appreciated. I'm a skeptic, but the things that happened have kept me on the fence. I am very much open to hearing other people's thoughts, because I have no way of explaining it. I'm very much the type of person that needs hard proof to believe in something. That's just how my mother raised me. If I were to tell her something like this, it would always be immediately brushed off. For context, my mom is very skeptical, but she is also a religious person, and she may not believe in ghosts, but she believes in demons. It started in this house, which was my parents' first real home, so they loved everything about it. When we moved in, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It's just a house, right? One of my dogs would always bark at this one wall, which as a child would freak me the hell out. I've watched enough scary movies to know that's not a good sign. but like I said, my mum paid no mind to it, so I took her side and soon lost interest. One day I was sitting in my living room messing around with my camera on flip phone when I saw it. My terrified eyes saw it, right there on my phone. It was a white ball just floating around on the screen. It looked like the size of a basketball, and it was floating towards me. I looked away from my phone in order to see it with my own two eyes, but there was nothing. I could only see it through my camera. For a moment I was frozen and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Then my next instinct was to immediately scream and call for my mum. She came barreling out of the shower and asked me what had happened. I told her what I had seen, and her response? "Honey, it was dust. No need to panic. Sometimes they look bigger on camera." This was a reasonable explanation, so I went with it, but I was still shaken because I knew what I saw. Later that same year, after I turned 13, I had become interested in making friendship bracelets with craft string. I would braid them to have a cool design. Nothing fancy, just a simple braid pattern that most girls at my schools would also do. Next to my bed I would keep penny coin wrappers and my craft string in a little basket. I woke up one day to find all the pennies packed into coin wrappers. My dad worked nights, so I assumed he'd just come in and done them for the hell of it while I was sleeping. This made sense to me at the time. A few days later I woke up to see that someone had made a necklace. It had this design that was way more advanced than my abilities, and it had a little plastic dolphin charm that I had never seen before. It threw me for a loop, because I obviously knew I hadn't made it, and my both parents didn't even know how to braid at all. How someone or something had made the necklace while I was sleeping really freaked me out. Scared, I took the necklace and threw it away, and didn't think to tell my mum because I knew she wouldn't believe me and would assume I was lying. That weekend we did our regular family outing. I got in my mum's car, and there it is. It was that stupid necklace hanging from my mum's rearview mirror. My body started to get hot as I went into a panic. My dad asked me what was wrong, and I asked my mum where she'd found the necklace. "In the garbage," she replied. "It's beautiful. I don't know why you would ever throw away something you'd worked so hard on." I ignored it, and we all went about our day. The very next day my mum started experiencing car trouble and took it into the mechanic. Later I walk into my room to see it sitting there on my dresser. I couldn't take it anymore and was petrified. I started crying hysterically, and my mum came in to ask me what was wrong, so I showed her the necklace. She then asked me how I got it out of the car. I told her it was just sitting here, and then I had verbal diarrhea and told her everything. I swore up and down to her that I did not make it, that I didn't know where the charm had come from, and I didn't know who did it. I was scared and just remember crying and holding her, begging to listen to me. She was never one to believe in paranormal stuff, but she finally believed me. She called the Catholic church that she went to growing up and had them mail a rosary and holy water, and she blessed the house. It meant a lot and it made me feel a lot better, but something about that house was so off to me. These incidents kept me on the fence about the paranormal. I'm just glad I'm out of that house now, and hopefully the people who live there now are happy. So many bad, non-paranormal things also happened in that house in the years to come, and my mum claims it was all the devil's work. Devil or not, I will never forget that stupid necklace. So, first a bit of backstory. It's now 20 minutes past midnight where I am. This all happened this morning, so it was around 17 hours ago. I have been really interested in the paranormal and everything to do with it. I lurk around in this subreddit often, and my mum also has had her fair share of paranormal encounters. I've never had any, at least I can't remember if I have. My mum told me I had always seen a man in my bedroom when I was a little kid, and now I'm 15 years old. I woke up this morning as normal. I have 2 cats, Mimi and Momo. Momo is pretty big and can get aggressive sometimes. I saw Momo walking into my room. He does this often and he will just sit by the door, just like he was doing this time. I didn't want him there though, but I was being lazy, so I just let him sit there. Suddenly, he just randomly jumps and aims for my head. For context, my bed is around 3 to 4 meters away from the door. He, as an already grandpa-aged cat, would never have been able to make that jump. That's when I knew something wasn't right. Of course he missed my head and landed against the wall next to me. Now I've noticed 3 things. 1. I tried to dodge him jumping, but I couldn't move. 2. I noticed that my perspective wasn't right. I was sitting upright against the wall, but I didn't sleep like that. I slept on my back. And the 3rd thing I noticed was that my other cat Mimi was also jumping around me now, just like Momo had been. By now I'd realized that I was clearly experiencing sleep paralysis. I could close my eyes, but that didn't really work, because I could see and feel them even with my eyes closed. I also felt this pressure on my chest. Luckily, I've read a lot about being in this situation, so I knew what to do. I started trying to wiggle my toes, and I could. The only body parts I could move were the toes on my right foot, so I started wiggling them like crazy. I had no sense of time, so God knows how long I've been wiggling my toes for, but eventually I felt that I could slowly and heavily lift my arm, and the moment I felt that I could, I came out of the paralysis and I was back in my normal sleeping position. I didn't sit upright, I was lying down. That sudden switch of perspective felt really weird and surreal. This was my first experience with sleep paralysis, and looking back on it, I actually wasn't, and I'm still not, very scared of it. Mainly because I was well prepared and knew exactly what was happening and what to do. But I'm shocked in a way. I've read about it a lot in the last few days, but I never thought that it would actually happen to me. I'm kind of afraid of it happening again, because who knows what my next hallucination will be. So I've got a question. Do you guys think I've got this sleep paralysis? Because I read about it a lot recently. Also, I live with my mum and sister. My mum is very sensitive to spirits and entities, and we've had a few in this house. But she says that this house right now is clear, and there's no entity here. I believe her. I've never noticed any paranormal activity in this house, as far as I know anyway. Nor do I think that this sleep paralysis was a paranormal experience, because I didn't see any ghosts or weird figures. Although I did hear a girl giggling before Momo had jumped for my head, which matches up with one of my mother's sightings from years ago. But the giggling could have just been pure imagination on my side. And yes, I do strongly believe in the paranormal. Thanks for reading. I live in an old house. It's around 100 years old, I believe, and it's in one of the oldest neighborhoods in my city. My mum, who's almost 60 years old, used to live in it when she was a child, so it's definitely old. I've never experienced anything paranormal, like seeing a ghost or anything like that, but I've always been quite paranoid about everything. Right now I'm sitting at my computer. My house is kind of mono-ambient, where the living room is also the dining room, and that's right next to the kitchen, and there are 3 doors. 2 to go to different bedrooms, and 1 goes to the bathroom. My parents run a shop in the front of the house, and there's a part of the house which is mainly used as a deposit on the back, and in the front right next to the shop. It's basically my dad's room crammed with all of his stuff. I've also got kind of a big backyard with lots of junk in it. So my concern is that I've been staying awake using my PC until around 5 AM for the last few weeks because I'm on vacation, and I've started sensing something when everyone's asleep and I'm the only one awake. I start feeling some kind of presence, and it feels like the air becomes heavier too, and I don't like it. I have 2 cats, and they usually sleep on top of the chairs or the table, which are in the same room that I am in right now. But many times I've seen them alert, looking at some random corner, for up to 1 minute non-stop. One of them is always uneasy around this time of night, and he starts wandering around the house, staring at different things, and it unsettles me a bit. I may be crazy and imagining it all, but I sometimes hear different sounds coming from somewhere in the house, especially from the shop in the front. Things like a chair moving a bit, or the sound of a bag or something slightly hitting a bottle, or maybe it's bugs. Just now, minutes before writing this, I was on my computer in the dark, and I heard something similar to a whisper, literally like if someone was whispering to me. So I turned on the lights and came back to sit here. Also, as I'm writing this, a faucet in the bathroom started randomly dripping, so you get the idea of what I'm talking about. These aren't the only things I've experienced. Many times while I was in my bed trying to sleep, I would hear something scratching my mattress. And last night I heard something drop on top of my bed, but to my surprise there was nothing there. A year or so ago, I remember it was a rainy day, and I was talking with my sister about my late great-grandmother, when suddenly a light bulb that had stopped working nearly a year ago started flickering. But it didn't happen again after that. My sister sleeps in the same room as me, and she's told me that she has heard scratchings on walls multiple times, usually around 3 a.m, which I find really freaky. If you've managed to read all of this, then you must certainly be interested in my possible paranoid experience. But I'm really afraid sometimes. As far as I know, nobody had died in this house, and nothing tragic had happened here, but some of this stuff is really freaky. I might be overthinking things and being paranoid. So what do you guys think? Is there something weird going on in this household? A little background. I recently moved into a new house, not too long ago, and within the first few nights I had my first experience with sleep paralysis and night terrors. I awoke in my room in this dream and turned around within the dream, and standing behind me in front of my spare closet door was a lady in a grey ripped dress, very old and had dark bags under her eyes. She rushed me, and there was a time where she had me within a choking grip. I then woke up and went back to sleep within this dream. I then woke up again standing back in the same spot, but this time I couldn't move. All I could do was stare into her lifeless eyes. Then I woke up screaming, and this was my very first experience with anything of the sort. Now to the recent events. I have 2 roommates, both of which have experienced very weird incidents relating to each other. First, one of my roommates has been having dreams that have come in different parts every time he has slept in the house. He has a girlfriend, and when he sleeps over at hers, these dreams don't occur. They start with him as a little boy, but he is not himself as a little boy. He then runs through this field and hears a woman laughing. Then he wakes up. The second dream he is the same little boy running through a field and turns around to see an elderly woman. But get this woman is in a grey dress that is ripped at the bottom, exactly as in my first dream. She then proceeds to stab the little boy with a knife, and he wakes up. Now my roommate was a skeptic, but following these dreams he was sitting in his rook one night, and his hat randomly moved to the middle of the floor on its own. Being skeptical, he of course threw this off as being that it was already there. A few moments later he felt like he was being covered in a weighted blanket and received a physical blow to the chest that he said knocked the air out of him. He then proceeded to look to the corner of his room, and standing there was the figure of an elderly woman. My second roommate. Relating back to the dream my first roommate had, where the little boy was stabbed, brings my second roommate into play. One night while sitting in his room smoking, out of nowhere he begins to think that what would happen if I was stabbed in the stomach. Now, considering my roommate never has sadistic thoughts and is not a bad person in any way, he is thinking about himself getting stabbed in the stomach. He said he felt paralyzed with anger, and he felt like he could take it out on others. He said he could not control the thought of stabbing his friend who was with him at the time. He sat there for 30 minutes, then texted me and asked, "Is there something in the house?" as he was sat there paralyzed with an anger that was extremely intense. Because of all of this, we believe that our house is haunted. We live in Charleston, which is one of the most haunted cities in the US. I just wanted to tell these experiences and see what everyone else thinks. I went through a lot of shit in 2017 that really made me question everything I believed in. It's not really important, but just the start of my journey. I guess in 2017 I went through something called the dark night of the soul. Basically, I lost every sense of meaning in my life. I was walking around as someone that wasn't me. I didn't have a care for anything in the world. For example, looking at something that usually would have been considered important meant absolutely nothing to me. The Googled version of what I was going through, which is much more understandable, is, it is a time of losing control, seeing without eyes, hearing without ears, and walking without feet. A period of transition between the ego and the heart, or put in even simpler terms, spiritual depression. After this point, shit just felt weird. I suddenly woke up a different person. I was able to see things, hear things, and know things. It's almost like a movie that plays out in parts of my mind and projects real-life situations. By no means am I saying I'm psychic or have special gifts. I'm just trying to say I was totally different. Everything was different. The world moved differently. The wind sounded different. The sky looked bluer. I was then able to sense energies, like the moment I walked into a room that had uneasy feelings, my neck hair would stand up. That's something else that I awoke with. I would get chills or goosebumps before, but never would my neck hair stand up and shoot a completely chilling sense down my spine. After experiencing the sight of a shadow figure that my dogs had also noticed, walked up to and sniffed, I would project these visions as the third person, and I would follow myself down this hallway over and over again. I would have to smoke pot in my bathroom at night to help with my nerves and the shit in my normal life. Smoking had become a routine, and I kept my stash in a high-ass cabinet above my toilet. It wasn't a flimsy fake wooden warm-up thing, it was solid wood. One night, after one of my many visions throughout the week, I sat down in my normal spot with my stash and started smoking, leaving the doors above me open. As I'm scrolling through my phone, looking at social media and relaxing, the door above me to the solid wood cabinet shut. But it wasn't just one of the doors, like if I accidentally brushed my head by it, or the AC blew it and it just slowly closed. But it was both of them slamming shut. They slammed so hard that they bounced back open. These occurrences didn't affect me anymore, but I was starting to think that I'd lost the plot and I was needing to see someone. All I kept thinking was that I was going crazy. But then it would start happening with my husband next to me to witness it. We would pause our Netflix show and be talking in bed and having us time. Then all of a sudden the Netflix show would come back on with full volume. Other times it felt like someone had hit their hip on our bed, causing it to shake a little. This just kept going on until one day I got so annoyed with it. I'm so tired and scared and confused. I started reaching out to others that have more experience with this type of thing, and it just keeps getting weirder and weirder. I would start praying out loud over and over. I'm by all means probably the last person to get on my knees and pray, as I wasn't raised that way, nor have I even read the Bible, but all this shit made me feel I had to. I don't know if my house is haunted or if I'm crazy, but the last event I'm going to tell you about really sent me over the edge. One afternoon I was waking up from a nap, and my husband was chilling in the room with his headset on. I open my eyes and there's this black figure hovering over me and seemed to be studying me. It was a completely black figure. It had eyes, but not actual eyes, just indents of where they should be. The same with its mouth. It had lips, but they were just black. It was completely black except for one spot in the middle of its forehead. I sound so crazy right now, but the one spot was softly lit and glowing white. Just a little diamond-like spot glowing white in the middle of its head. As he's bent over studying me, I'm staring right back at it. I don't feel uneasy or uncomfortable though. I actually felt almost curious. Like maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe this is actually really happening. One last weird thing about this inhuman being was when it would breathe in, it was all one person in one piece. But when it exhaled, its right arm would start moving out into pieces, almost pixelated. Then when it inhaled, it would all come back together again. I don't know. I recently moved 4 months ago back to Florida and left that house. I have cleansed my house, myself, and anyone around me, and nothing has happened since. There were so many other weird things that had happened. I have at least 20 different incidents, but those were just the ones that felt most important to talk about. Thanks for reading. I'll let you determine if this is purely mental illness, or maybe paranormal.